Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar about remote assessments for English learners. I'm Emily Sumner, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, I'm going to review just a few tips to help the webinar run smoothly for you. The GoToWebinar platform does not have a group chat, but we do welcome your questions and your feedback. You can send a question in throughout the presentation, and we'll put that in the queue to be answered at the end during our Q&A period. If you'll locate the questions bar or icon on your control panel, you can type your question into that box, click send, and again, I'll get your question and I'll put it into the queue to be answered during the end. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can also use that questions feature to send me a note, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. One thing you can do right now to try to make the webinar run smoothly is close all of the other programs on your computer, Word, PowerPoint, whatever you have open, as well as all your other internet browser tabs. So if you just leave GoToWebinar open, that will allow all of your internet and computer bandwidth to go to power the video and the audio. If you do have video and audio lags that don't resolve themselves or smooth out after a few seconds, you can try logging out of GoToWebinar and coming right back in, and that often resets the connection. We are recording today's presentation, so if you're not able to stay for the whole hour, or you just can't take notes quickly enough, or you want to share it with your colleagues, that is all great. Again, we'll be recording it, and we'll send an email to you probably either tomorrow or the day after with a link to the recording as well as the slide deck. We'll also be posting the recording and the slide deck to the Ballard and Ty website, so you can take a look there as well. In the email that you'll get in the next day or two, you'll also receive a certificate of attendance, so you'll want to keep an eye out again for that email. All right, so before we start the presentation, we'd like to get to know a little bit about what your interests are and what you're hoping to learn today. So we're just going to do a quick poll. So I will launch that now. And we'll just give you a few seconds to answer which of these remote assessment for ELs, curriculum and instruction for ELs, or all of the above that you are most interested in learning about today. All right, we've got lots of people voting, which is great. We'll just give it about 10 more seconds, and then we'll see what rises to the top. All right, let's see. Okay, well, 73% of you are interested in both remote assessment and curriculum and instruction, and so you are in luck because we are going to touch on both of those things today. So let's get started. I am pleased to welcome Lori Hill to join me on screen. She is an educational consultant for Ballard and Ty, and she is going to get us started. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm Lori Hill, educational consultant for Ballard and Ty and for the IPT. I've been in curriculum and assessment for over 16 years. There have been many changes in education this past decade, and 2020 has challenged us all in many new ways. Remote testing and teaching requires best practices in working with colleagues, students, and technology. In this webinar, we will first be hearing from Dr. Sari Loma, VP of Assessment, as she gives an in-depth discussion on how to adapt assessments for remote learning. Then we will hear from Brenda Rosas, Educational Sales Consultant for Ballard and Ty Curriculum. Brenda will show us how to use the assessment results to guide strategic instruction. So without further delay, I will turn it over to Dr. Loma.
Thank you very much, Lori, and hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I hope it's going very well for you so far. So, as we all know, conditions keep changing in the world and in schools, and that affects whether we can be in a shared space. And that means that we need to broaden our strategies to roll with the changes, and this includes assessment strategies. And that's what my portion of this presentation is about. So when the situation changes and we need to go remote, or we need to keep switching between in-person and remote, we could choose not to assess, and that has one kind of consequences. We could choose a different assessment than our usual one, and that has different kinds of consequences. Or we can choose to adapt our usual assessment for remote administration. I'm going to talk about that, about the what, why, and how of adapting assessments for remote administration. I'll be focusing on getting at the construct or the skills assessed and what that means. And I'll show some examples of adaptations from our IPT test, and that leads into the benefits from all that adaptation work in instructional implications. So why would we adapt our assessments? To meet the requirements of the changing conditions and to support the decisions about remote learning. How do we do the adapting? The most important thing is to maintain the underlying conceptual structure of the assessment, the construct. What does that mean then? It means that you need to maintain the comparability of the skills assessed, the tasks and the prompts, and the comparability of the scoring and score interpretation. So here's a picture of what I'm talking about. The skills assessed at the top can technically be called the construct. The construct is directly connected to both the tasks and the scoring design of the assessment. So this is the underlying conceptual structure that we need to think about when we change assessment and instructional modes. And of course, it applies whether we are choosing a different assessment or adapting our current assessment. I'm focusing more on the adapting our current assessment part, but you can apply it also to other settings. Let's look at this in a little more detail in the context of an oral assessment. We'll be using the IPT oral tests as an example. So the construct and its implementation starts with the skills assessed. And in the case of the IPT, the oral proficiency is defined as comprehension, verbal expression, vocabulary, and grammar. And each dimension, each of these 4 dimensions is assessed across proficiency levels. In terms of tasks and prompts, what it means in the way we have realized this construct is that we have scripted prompts by the examiner. We have expected responses that we define, and those responses are relatively short, and the expectations define words or types of forms or structures or language functions that the learners need to use in replying successfully. And these prompts are grouped into test levels for administration. Each response is scored on the scoring side in terms of either correct or incorrect. Each test level has a stopping rule for the group of questions that comprises the level. And if a student answers less than half of the prompts at a particular test level correctly, then they have not met the level requirements and their proficiency is actually at the previous level. If they answer between half and 2/3 of the questions correctly, they are at that particular level. If they answer more than 2/3 of the questions correctly at a particular level, they go on to the next level to see if their proficiency reaches that far. So this is the basic functional structure of the IPT oral tests. And this is what we want to replicate in our remote adaptation. When we change the delivery of the test from face-to-face to remote, it may change the prompts, or at least some of the prompts. And that may change the skills assessed if we don't take special care to adapt the prompts appropriately so that the skills assessed stay the same. And it may change the scoring if we don't keep a careful eye on how the student is expected to respond and what are the skills that are required to come up with the expected responses. So that's what we need to maintain and optimize to maintain comparability between face-to-face and remote assessments. Let's look at what this looks like in practice. My first example is from the IPT 1 and 2 oral tests, which are our tests for K6 and 6th to 12th graders. Some of the items in the IPT oral tests rely on test pictures. Oh no.
Is everything okay?
Someone claimed that I had signed out. Are we still on?
Yep, we still got you.
Thank you. I'm
And
sorry.
we're still seeing your screen, so I think we're okay, fingers crossed.
Thank you. Scary, and these things happen when you are remote.
They do, but I think we're safe right now, and hopefully it stays
Okay.
that way.
All right. So, as I was saying, that some of the items rely on test pictures. When the tests are administered in person, the examiner and the student are looking at the same physical picture. For example, in this sample item, the examiner says, "Look at this picture, point to the girl." And the student points. When the test is given remotely, the examiner and student are also on in a shared space, but they're looking at the same picture, but they're not in a shared space. So the examiner can't see what the student is pointing at. Even if the examiner is on the screen next to the test picture, and all they can see is the examiner's finger, but they can't see which child the test taker is pointing to. So what we did is we added letters to the picture and changed the wording to say, "Look at this picture. Which one is the girl? Tell me the letter." You can do the same type of adjustment with your own assessments as well, if your face-to-face assessment is simple enough to allow this. It's a good way to go because there's a good chance that the assessments will turn out to be comparable. Though, of course, you need to check if they are comparable by looking at your impressions if you have a small sample, or looking at data if you have a big sample. You'll want to pay special attention to the complexity of language. You want to make the minimum changes and keep them as simple as you can so that your question still focuses on the same element of oral communication and not some additional complexity in the new wording. Next, I want to talk about the Pre-IPT, which is our preschool language proficiency assessment. The Pre-IPT makes much more use of the shared environment when it is administered face-to-face. There's a storyboard with characters, and the examiner and student move the storyboard characters around as the test proceeds. This, of course, works well with 3 to 5-year-olds who the test is for. Now, when we move this test to the remote situation, we have to make many more changes. We briefly considered making a digital storyboard, but we decided against it because there were too many things that could go technically wrong. There could be time lags between what the examiner sees and what the student sees in terms of what's happening in the picture. There could be situations where the bandwidth can't withstand the added load of moving pictures. There could be small screens where you can't see where the parts of the moving picture are. Importantly, it could affect the delay, the pause, and in oral assessment, pausing affects our assessment of the student's fluency. And we wouldn't be able to tell if the pause is because of a time lag, a picture that has not changed, or because of thinking time, or because the student doesn't know what to say. So instead, we started from the beginning of that conceptual structure with the definition of this construct. What is being assessed at each test level what kinds of comprehension and language use. So we kept that the same, but we changed the way the test is conducted. So instead of using a storyboard, the examiner becomes a character and a demonstrator. The examiner is asked to wear certain items of clothing and show certain objects and use them to demonstrate things, movements, and relationships for the examiner and student to talk about. We also shortened each test level a little because we needed to be mindful of how well young students can focus on a screen talking to a person who they might not know. So in order to keep the language assessed in the test parallel to the face-to-face test, we changed many of the non-language elements of how we present the tasks. And luckily, our analysis indicates that the measurement results are very closely parallel to the face-to-face application of the test. This kind of adaptation is more work, but it can be done as long as you approach the tasks from the design perspective so that you keep in mind the skill definition, the way it's realized in tasks, and the way it's realized in expected student responses and the scoring structure to keep all of those things parallel between the two modes, the face-to-face and the remote. A big payoff for investing in the work of adapting your assessment for remote administration is that you can then use the information from the results to guide instruction. When your reporting categories are clear and they're coherent with your definition of the skills assessed and the skills required by the tasks, then it's relatively straightforward to draw implications from student performances to what that means in terms of what they are ready for and what they might benefit from in instruction. So that's what we're turning to next, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Brenda Rosas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenda Rosas, and I have spent the last 15 years in EL classrooms, specifically at the secondary level and mostly multi-level. And I've done a lot of curriculum as well as some assessment and tying it to curriculum. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on if you have an assessment, your own, or the IPT, how you can use the assessment to inform instruction, using it as a guide for intervention. So when you are working with your students, you could then target their weak areas and make those stronger so that when they take the test next or the assessment next, hopefully they'll do better. We're going to look a little bit at reports. They could be used for identification or redesignation, and how to do that for progress monitoring over time. But most importantly, we are going to spend quite a lot of time on a diagnostic report, which the IPT does provide. And this will really be useful to inform instruction for oral, which is speaking and listening, as well as reading and writing. We're going to talk about intervention, again, those weak areas, and some recommendations for curricular materials, whether that's something you already have and how to use it, or something that we provide here at Ballard and Ty. And just to remind you, I am the educational consultant here for curriculum at Ballard and Ty. So hopefully I'll chat with some of you soon. All right, for the IPT, we have district level reports. These are really great because you can see just oral, just reading, just writing, or you can see an overall proficiency summary at the district level. And what is great about this is you can see the percentages of students at the different levels. So for example, white at beginning or early intermediate, and see all these at advanced. So you could see where your students lie as far as levels. You can also see as far where they are in designation, whether they're a non or a limited or a fluent or competent speaker, listener, reader, or writer. And then the number breakdowns. So I really love this report because you can see it on a big picture at a district level. You can also then see the breakdown of grades and compare the numbers for different grade levels and see if they're progressing as they're getting to higher grade levels, or if your ESL students or EL students are concentrated more at the younger grades. This one seems to be a lot at the higher grades. You can also see how schools are being compared to each other, or just in general, maybe one school has more ELs than another, or how they're doing in the different skill levels or overall. We also have school as well as classroom reports, and these are useful because at the school level, a principal can see how the school is performing by grade level or even the students individually in those schools. Classroom reports can be given to teachers, or admin can see how each classroom is doing by grade level or even by student. Score reports are useful for students. Student score reports are useful to show parents, or you can put it in their CUME file, or you can show it to the teachers to understand how they're doing in oral, reading, and writing. But I really like the overall proficiency summary, again, putting everything in one spot. If in the IPT they take the English as well as the Spanish tests, you'll see here that you can kind of compare if maybe they did well in English, maybe see how they did in Spanish. Was their literacy really high already? And that's causing a transfer into English. A lot of schools like to see if maybe they're not yet literate in Spanish, then they'll know what their English scores might look like. But here you'll see on a student level, the English, the Spanish, the different levels that they're in, the different designations, how to place them, and this will help you move to the next step. So what is the next step? Once you've placed a student, or you've seen like you've identified them, or maybe trying to redesignate them, there's more that you can do with an assessment if the assessment allows for that. And so like Dr. Loam was saying, if you've done all the necessary things to create the assessment and to call upon certain things like grammar, form, and function, or comprehension, or vocabulary, then there will be a report, possibly like the IPT, that will then recommend instructional recommendations on what to do with students moving forward. So let's look at that. The report that this will turn out as in the IPT is called the Individual Student Diagnostic Report. As an educator, I get really excited about this report. The reason for that is because as a teacher, I want to know what each individual student, or maybe even more so, like what the commonalities are between my students are, so that I can target those areas and know that my curricular time is focused on something that's going to help them improve their scores for the next assessment. Obviously, I don't agree that we should all teach to a test, but there is some rationale for teaching things that may be on a test that they may encounter, because that's just good teaching for them to better their English proficiency. So we're going to talk a little bit about reading and writing and what that report looks like, some interventions for that, and some curricular recommendations, and then later we'll move on to the oral part. So in the IPT reading and writing, in the report itself, you're going to see the designation, the proficiency level. Yes, those are very important, but a breakdown of vocabulary and context. So a student may be strong in vocabulary, but in vocabulary and context, they don't really understand how to use a word in context, or the flip of, maybe they're really good at weak at vocabulary, but in context, they do a lot better. We're going to talk about reading for understanding, reading for life skills, and definitely language usage. This is a little bit more along the lines of grammar or the grammar functions. And then when we move over to writing, the conventions is definitely a lot of grammar. And then productive writing of writing a story and writing your own story. So in the report, you're actually going to see scores for this. So this is an example of the reading and writing diagnostic report for the IPT1. So the student is 3rd grade between K to 6, so 3rd grade. And you'll see here the designations of a limited English reader and writer, and the level of intermediate for reading and an early intermediate for writing. This norming score mean group, it's really important because you could see where the student falls below that. So these are the areas I really do want to target. You're also going to see in the part that just got covered, in the reading, you're going to see vocabulary, reading for understanding. But like we talked about earlier, vocabulary is 7, but in context, the student can guess the meaning of the word. And then you'll have reading for understanding, reading for life skills. Reading for life skills is when students look at charts or calendars or some kind of graph, and they can then comprehend what's going on there. But you can see here, language usage and conventions are very weak for the student. Both areas are 6 out of 10. So as a teacher, I know that I'm going to target a lot of grammar and and really help them through those grammar and their functions. And then writing a story and writing your own story, well, if their grammar is weak, it's possibly carrying over into their productive writing. So here you're going to see what a limited English reader and a limited English writer can do. So this really explains to you what they can already do, where they are, and really helping you conceptualize what the student's strengths are. Because you want to know where they're strong so you can then focus on what their weaknesses are. But here, you're also going to have recommendations for how to help these areas of weakness. So you're going to see things like practice reading text aloud and checking for understanding, or doing comprehension checks with all the reading texts, which a lot of teachers already do with comprehension questions. But maybe you want to work on comprehension elements to connect things such as meanings and phrases, main idea, details, cause and effect, things like that. So those are some great recommendations here that you can use as a checklist. Recommendations for writing, you're going to see some of the things I like are when you teach the students to check what task they're supposed to write about. Many times students will get a prompt and they will just start writing and trying to answer the question that they think is the question. But I physically ask students to circle things, underline things in the prompt to show me they understand exactly what they're being tasked to do. You're also going to see discussion of sample texts, sample sentences to use it as a model so students can see how they should be doing writing and improve their writing. So here you're going to see some of the things I talked about. So for intervention, some recommendations for reading is to always focus on reading skills. As EL teachers, we really do think decoding. My student needs to learn how to read, how to pronounce a certain word. But really, students need that extra skill of reading comprehension, understanding how to find cause and effect, problems and solutions, main idea, details. They really need those reading skills. Strategies, there are a lot of strategies to work on these things. For example, you could do things like noticing, or ask them to make charts and graphs and find certain things to focus on the reading skills. But definitely, like I mentioned before, reading comprehension elements are very important. When there are different genres, you're going to have different elements. You're going to always have word definitions or the meaning of phrases. So two words together may mean something different than the two individual words. Identifying a topic or main idea, sequence of events, and cause and effect. Some writing recommendations are definitely, like we said earlier, the writing prompts, finding out what the task is, getting them to circle the task. I've done in the past just activities, just giving them a list of writing prompts, prompt after prompt after prompt. They never actually write the essay or the writing. They just circle, tell me what it is, tell me what you're supposed to write. Okay, next prompt. Tell me what you're supposed to do. Okay, next prompt. And this really helps them see a prompt, read it, and think, what do I need to do before actually trying to plan out the writing? Checking for writing conventions. Grammar is huge. We all talk about proofreading, peer editing, but really maybe just focusing on one convention, like just past tense or just present tense or just plurals, and looking through the writing only for that one aspect. And again, looking at writings as models. You can do noticing activities for just that. And then you could also do the writing activities models to then have them not copy it, but use it as a model to then write something else. All right. So when we talk about recommendations for curricular materials, Ballard and Ty, we have a lot of curriculum, and a lot of them are really strong in the philosophies of grammar, form, and function, as well as different genres of text. So for reading recommendations for kindergarten, first, maybe even second graders, so the littles, I hear your teachers tell me, hands-on English is really great at balancing fiction and informational texts. Reading and comprehension skills are definitely worked on. Sequencing, cause and effect, these type of skills are really great for students, and they are practiced within hands-on English. Carousel, generally recommended for K-5, but more so your 2nd to 5th grade if you're going to use hands-on English for the littles. Carousel comes with a lot of content-based readings with comprehension questions. So if you want to do things like they're doing things for for social studies or science, so a science report. And then with Champion, you're really going to have reading for rigor, comprehension, academic reading tasks. All right. So for writing recommendations, a really great program is Frames for Fluency. This is really for K to 12. So for K to say 5th grade, it's really great for, maybe a 2 or 3 year program. But for 6 through 12, especially for those newcomers, you want to hit them hard for the 2 to 3 months of like just really helping them learn that foundational language, helping them get ready to read. Frames for Fluency comes with theme pictures that really do focus on writing. So the oral proficiency practice that you get from Frames for Fluency leads then into writing. So speaking to write. And a really great philosophy of grammar, form, and function, and a scope and sequence that you can look at and just target past tense. So one thing I really like about this and for grammar, form, and function is teachers, if you've ever had that, time where you have taught past tense, let's say, and you keep reminding them week after week, day after day, remember past tense, remember to add the ED or just add the D, we're in past tense, past time, and then you just want to pull your hair out. Have you ever had this? Because I always felt this. That's when you're going to want to stop. Go maybe into something like Frames for Fluency or something you have, and just target past tense. So with Frames for Fluency, scope, and sequence, you can do all the activities just on past tense and maybe spend a week on that, and then later say, okay, we've done the past tense, and hopefully you'll see improvement. With Carousel for 2nd to 5th grade, there's academic writing tasks as well as editing. And then in Champion, you're going to see academic writing tasks as well for those middle school, high school students with that rigor. So for example, who, what, where, when, why from a reading. You're going to pull out the who, what, where, when, why. You're going to put it in a summary. You're going to model it for them before you then write. Okay. When we're looking at the individual diagnostic reports for oral, we're going to look again at intervention as well as recommendations for curricular materials. So in the individual student diagnostic report, you're going to see here that it is, for the student, the grade, then you're going to have a level, A through F. Well, that doesn't mean a lot to a person who doesn't know this assessment very well, which is okay, because it's going to tell you it's the intermediate level and the designation of limited English speaking. But even more so, here is what a student at level D can typically do. So these are can-do descriptors. I know a lot of you do work with can-do descriptors, so here you'll see that on the report. This is one of my favorite parts of the reports, just because in red it totally stands out. I know the student is weak in body parts or occupations or weather. You'll see the vocabulary, the grammar, comprehension, and language functions. I can see verbs, simple present. I could see the student needs help giving rationale or providing supporting details. In the IPT, they're going to take these different skill sets and show where maybe they don't have any weaknesses, where they're mild or severe. And you can see even BICS and CALP represented here. Here are some explanations of what those, BICS means, or listening, comprehension, etc. And then a list of weaknesses. You could use this as like a checklist. So there's vocabulary. So for example, calendars, days of the week. I can go into hands-on English, find the lesson on days of the week, and focus on that, pull that out, and make lesson plans, make that week of lesson plans for days of the week. And there's some really cute slides there with songs and chants about days of the week. So this is a really great time to do that. If you then see future tense or simple present or, positive questions, you can do lessons just on each of these areas and build out, lessons that maybe it's already in curriculum or a curriculum that we have here at Ballard and Ty. Language functions, you're going to always see a lot here. Again, this is the gateway to academic language, and you're going to want to work on these and spend a lot of time on it. For example, just understanding the details of a story, characters, actions, problems, and solutions. Things like summarizing plot, giving supporting details and rationale, Students need to do this all the time in any assessment, focusing on standards. Those are things that you always have to work on. In the report, there is going to be a breakdown of recommendations. So for example, the vocabulary recommendation. You're going to see here all the vocabulary sections that the student may need some extra work in. Now, I do want to point out in the chart earlier, if it said occupations, that doesn't mean students don't know all the occupations. They may have only missed one question on occupations, but even if they missed one question, it's a great time to review or to go over different occupations, because even with that practice in vocabulary, you then are practicing reading, writing, listening, and speaking along with it. But from this chart, you'll see vocabulary recommendations. We also in the IPT report will show you from Carousel, a Ballard and Ty set of materials, what pages you can go to in the teacher's guide to target instruction. You can also see here in Frames for Fluency, as well as Creative Ideas. Creative Ideas are workbooks. Creative Ideas, Frames for Fluency, and Carousel all work together with the same themes, with the same topics, and they the same grammar form and functions, and they work together to help students. So for intervention in general, if you used any type of curriculum you wanted, definitely you want to teach by theme. So if you are not following an already curriculum that's set for you and it's linear, you could just pick a theme and focus on that theme. For example, occupations. You could then in your materials or whatever materials you have, look for chapters and topics that are only about occupations. In that way, students are understanding, okay, it's the vocabulary or the theme of occupations. They then understand that it's thematic and what they're trying to accomplish here. Whenever you teach vocabulary, for example, vocabulary of occupations, you want to use images. A lot of the time, if you've followed our webinars, we keep talking about this. Vocabulary, teach it with images. Images help little ones, the middle age group, as well as the older middle school and high school students, because if you use images for the older students, they know these words in their first or second or even third language. So you'll help them make that connection with images. Readings about that same topic. So we could have readings about a specific occupation, or the character is a veterinarian and is working on a farm. Then you'll see the vocabulary and context, like the word veterinarian. Whenever you are teaching for intervention, whenever you're teaching in general, you always want to do a blended approach of the 4 skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The more skills you can do while teaching something, the better a student is going to be able to do it later on. Definitely speak to write first. They could see it in reading. They could then talk about it in that reading, and just try as much as you can to put those 4 skills in. If you were to use our materials at Ballard and Ty, if you want to talk about those materials, I'm here for you. But our materials, again, with Frames for Fluency, we're talking about that. And a great example is for body parts. You'll see the topic, the body parts, and then the title, The Amazing Body, more about the amazing body, and busybodies. Those 3 will be in Frames for Fluency. It will spiral back to body parts, body, things about the body. Throughout Frames for Fluency in different chapters and units and chapters. And the same with Carousel and the same with Creative Ideas, because they are all partnered together with Carousel, Frames for Fluency, and Creative Ideas. Hands-on English, there will be things like days of the week, like we talked about with the slides, with different images of the calendar, teaching students days of the week. And Champion, you could do things about the amazing body. For example, in Champion, there will be a content-based reading for more like science or anatomy type reading about the body. For grammar, you're going to see a huge list of grammar. Students really do struggle in grammar, but this is great as like a checkoff list. I can use this list and actually create content for teaching in the classroom, for lessons, maybe even for half the year or even a whole year if I needed to, because of the individual pieces here. Countable and uncountable nouns. You'll see the intervention from Carousel and Creative Ideas, but also in Champion with the middle school and high school, countable and uncountable nouns are taught with the topic of food, just like with the younger kids. So you'll see a lot of the same grammar topics that the little kids struggle with, the middle school, high school students struggle with as well. But how do you teach it? That's why there's this intervention from Carousel or Creative Ideas or Frames for Fluency or Champion. It's going to tell you what page numbers those topics are already on. So in general, grammar, form, and function really does need targeted intervention, lesson planning, curriculum time to work on that with students. Definitely do it by noticing. Take a reading, a writing, and find all of the countable and uncountable nouns. Let's highlight them, or let's make all the countable ones blue and all the uncountable ones green. And then have images of countable and uncountable fruit or vegetables or food, and then have students categorize it into different charts. A lot of the times you can take a writing. So if you're working with verb tense, you saw a lot of weak areas for verb tense. You can change one verb tense to another. So present to past, past to present, present to future. But always with grammar, form, and function, you really do want students to notice, to try to guess what that grammar, form, and function is, but you definitely afterwards need to do direct instruction and then practice. So teach them. We're focusing on past tense. We're focusing on countable and uncountable. We're now going to practice it. And definitely do this practice again with all 4 skills. In our materials, we have something called Go English. These are great charts for teachers use as a resource to see at what level you can focus on things like countable, uncountable, or past tense, present tense. So it kind of gives you a visual approach to a scope and sequence to see when you would roll out these different grammar forms as well as functions. In Frames for Fluency, again, I mentioned earlier the scope and sequence. You can really focus and target any grammar, form, and function for K-12. Creative Ideas has a lot of grammar. You'll have a lot of image-based, matching, cut and paste even for the littles, and really helping them with writing out grammar and doing independent practice activities in the form of worksheets. And all others as well. So all of our curricular materials have a lot of grammar, form, and function, just because that's a really strong philosophy of ours. You're going to see here with comprehension, when you think comprehension, you think fiction as well as informational text. But what about a poem or a riddle or a song or a chant or something even more simple for the little ones? There are some questions earlier on how do I help students that are reluctant to speak, and maybe we just want them to interact. So a great thing that is in Hands-on English, as well as Carousel and some in our Creative Ideas, are songs and chants. Where students can start to repeat, use hand motions, and they start to speak and they don't really realize. I have a little 6-year-old that's in kindergarten right now, and literally she's in a dual language immersion program learning Spanish, and all I hear are songs in Spanish, and then there's the good morning song in English. So students at that young age group, they learn by songs and chants and repeating and reciting. So you're going to see a lot of that throughout here. And then, of course, your fictional and non-fictional articles, stories and articles. Charts definitely help them to visualize it. And then you're going to see in Carousel where you can go for help there. I think I've said enough about song and chants. I'm really, really excited about that again. But you can find songs and chants, on YouTube videos or a lot of different make it up yourself. A lot of different things. They don't have to be with our set of materials. Fiction and nonfiction. Definitely do pre-reading. You can do a lot of that image-based. You can do like a picture walk or a gallery walk. People call them different things, but you flip through the reading, show the pictures, kind of get the students talking about the reading and what they think is going to happen. After the reading or before the reading, you could do things like anchor charts or graphs to help students understand brainstorming activities. And then later at the end, they can pull out information from the reading, plop it on charts and graphs. Comprehension questions, we all know students have to do these. A lot of you teachers probably just ask them without even writing them down. Comes naturally, but critical thinking questions, focusing on standards, that higher level of thinking, definitely make sure you have those as well. For our materials, again, songs and chants with Creative Ideas and Hands-on English, and then reading skills. There's going to be a lot of that with Hands-on English, even for the littles, Carousel, and definitely Champion with that rigor for the older kids. Language functions are something that is very difficult to teach, I think. We sometimes do it because we see a standard or objective and then we have to do it, but we may miss things that students really do struggle with even if we've taught it. So for example, analyzing and explaining a graph. Like we can show a graph and we can say, here's the graph, but we forget to have students really comprehend what's happening in that graph. Making predictions, I'm sure a lot of you do that, but then what about sequencing or summarizing or inferring the content from a story? So these are very good to do, and you can see here from Carousel where you might do that. But definitely one way to do this when you're doing intervention and focusing on weaknesses, flip through the objectives of different chapters or lessons or any curriculum that you already have. The objectives is where you're going to see many of those language functions and those standards actually met. Practice speaking and listening together, use fiction and informational text, and then do it in writing. Okay, so all of these things, like express your likes and dislikes, have them talk about it, and then write about it. In our materials, you're going to see a lot of grammar, form, and function, but the function part in Frames for Fluency, as well as Carousel and Champion, because again, it's a huge part of our philosophy here at Ballard and Ty. I just wanted to briefly show you what older middle school, high school report might look like, just because it's slightly different. You're going to see the same levels of proficiency, the can-do descriptors. The chart is going to be different, obviously, because the questions are different. So here you're going to see occupations is, again, a struggle, and, recalling or something to do with stories. The relative weaknesses, like you saw earlier, the chart of the weak areas that you can focus on to get the students to that next level, which would be E. So you can use this as a checklist. But again, notice the language functions. Again, describing, explaining, recommending. You're going to see the chart, but here you're going to see all the red level. In Champion, you'll have 2 different levels. So you'll see that there. And then comprehension, again, recommending for Champion. Language functions, again, recommending for Champion, but sequencing, idiomatic expressions, identifying is very, very similar. Younger kids and older kids all still need to do those language functions. So in general, when we're talking about intervention, we really do want to examine what curriculum do you already have? What materials do you already have? Look at the chapters, look at the topics so you can focus on vocabulary. Look at the objectives to focus on language function. Look at the scope and sequence for grammar, form. Vocabulary, again, you want to look for just vocabulary words. Great, teach them with images. Grammar, form, and function. Activities, again, all 4 levels, and definitely put it down in a lesson plan or follow an already made lesson plan. In our materials, they're already thematic. They're thematic in every single one. Frames for Fluency, Hands-on English, Carousel, as well as Champion. The objectives are very, very clear. It's going to include a lot of the forms or the functions of grammar. Scope and sequence, like I said, you could use the back of the scope and sequence for Frames for Fluency to specifically target. They're all image-based from the kindergarten all the way to 12th grade, grammar, forms, and functions. We love to teach through sentence frames. Sentence frames are very useful because you're going to have students practice a form through a sentence frame. They practice it in speaking, and then in I do it, we do it, you do it model, especially in Frames for Fluency. And then it'll create this automaticity in speaking. They'll see it in reading. They'll then be able to write it. So definitely try to use sentence frames. Readings, you definitely want to have a balance of informational as well as fiction. All 4 skills, definitely in the Ballard and Ty materials. It's part of our approach. And then in the curriculum for Ballard and Ty, we always have scripted lesson plans. So hands-on English, I know I've been talking about these a lot, so I'm just going to briefly go over them. Hands-on English, you're going to have very easy to use teacher guides, a program guide that's going to explain some of the activities. Here's a list of all your scope and sequence as far as vocabulary, grammar, form, functions. You're going to have the vocab cards that are image-based with the words, the sentence frames we were talking about. You're going to have worksheets that are for students to practice vocabulary, grammar, form, and function, sequencing, and then the informational text and fiction balance. And because during this time of virtual instruction or hybrid, Hands-on English has a teacher's e-port that's super useful, where you can project the grammar, form, and function frames. You're going to see the word and picture cards. The readings are there as well as the slides, like the songs or chants. English Match, which is a part of Hands-on English, but also on its own supplemental in nature, is very useful because it talks about all of the tell a story, focus on a character, talk about plot, all of the reading skills and writing skills that students do need to practice. You're going to do it with vocabulary as well as comprehension questions, so speaking to then write. Carousel of IDEAS, I mentioned that a lot, along with Frames for Fluency. Again, they're partners with Creative Ideas workbooks. I said a lot about this, but just to reiterate here, content-based, you're going to see a lot of printable PDFs or things that will help with that content-based instruction for social studies, science, ELA, and then you'll also have your fiction and your word and picture cards. The sentence frames, theme picture cards are really great for using it as a springboard for language. And then that Go English, that's going to focus a lot on where to teach the grammar forms and functions. Frames for Fluency we just talked about, but 2 very easy to use teacher guides. If you want a product that is 0 prep, this is the way to go. Again, that intervention with the scope and sequence, this is Frames for Fluency, these set of materials. And then Champion of Ideas. We do have this paper-based, but also a completely digital platform where teachers and students can go digital. What's great about Champion is the rigor. You're going to have a lot of informational text and fiction, reading genres. You're going to have students have vocabulary as well as image-based vocabulary. They're going to have workbooks that are interactive, testers that will grade automatically most of the time. You're going to really have students get from a lower level to a higher level with those grammar functions that we talked about. So a lot of times there's students in secondary will get stuck at like level 3, and you need them to get to level 4 or 5 to test out. This is where Champion is really going to help you, because it really does get students, thinking and doing all those academic tasks in reading and writing that sometimes you don't have the opportunity to teach. So Champion is really great. It has a digital platform, and so you could teach it through hybrid as well as virtual learning. At this point, I'm going to invite Lori back to talk about the IPT.
Thank you, Brenda. That was a lot of good information. And Dr. Loma for your in-depth look at the reports and adapting the test for guiding curriculum. When data informs our instruction, we move forward with teaching plans that ensure students reach their full potential. The IPT family of standardized tests for pre-K through 12th grade provide a valid, reliable, and grade-appropriate tool for identification and redesignation of your ELs, for progress monitoring, for informing instruction and adjusting instructional strategies, and for dual language programs. The IPT family of tests are student-friendly, flexible, paper, online, and the online and remote we've discussed in this webinar. Cost-effective, scalable to the size of your district's changing needs. They're straightforward and easy to implement. The online robust diagnostic reports, as Brenda went over, really give educators a quick and accurate view of each student's language proficiency. So on our last page, I just want to show you, if you'll click, that's our contact information. We'd love to continue the conversation with you. We're running short on time, so perhaps we can answer questions one-on-one and also set up a demo. Brenda and I would love to work with you.
Okay, at this time.
Hi, ladies.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Sari. And we do have a few minutes for questions, so we'll go ahead and take what questions we can. And then, as Lori said, you're welcome to reach out to either her or Brenda with specific questions about the curriculum or IPT. And if there are the more technical questions about the construct of the assessments, they can loop Sari in on those. But like I said, let's go ahead and take a few of the questions that have come in. And Sari, we will start with you with a super basic question that I don't think we touched on at the beginning, but what does IPT actually mean? What does it stand for?
It stands for Individual Proficiency Test.
Perfect. That's great. So
Thank you. That was an easy one to start with.
That's right. We're just easing right in there. But we do have another question about the IPT assessments, and that is for the various score reports to populate. Is it necessary to deliver all parts of the assessment in all language domains, or will it still populate if you deliver only one assessment? For example, just the oral assessment.
If you give just the oral assessment, the oral diagnostic report populates. So
okay.
it will be super useful to use the oral diagnostic report, and that it's a big yield for doing the online IPT oral. For the overall report with oral reading and writing to produce, the report produces, but it doesn't give as much information if you don't give all the parts of the test. But for any skill that you do test, like if you just give the reading, there is a reading diagnostic. And if you just give the writing, there is a writing diagnostic. It's more detailed if you give both reading and writing, but you can give just one.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. And one more question on the assessments before we jump to you, Brenda, with some curriculum questions. How do the proficiency levels within IPT correlate with WIDA or TELPAS or ELPA 21 levels and benchmarks?
We have an alignment with the TESOL standards. WIDA does not like to make direct alignments between their test and other tests. So we have those for instructional products, but not for our assessment products created by WIDA. For ELPA 21, we have house-made correspondences, and for any region that wants to conduct a standard setting exercise with me, I would be happy to engage with a group of about 10 educators for about 5-6 hours, and we can get more alignments together.
That's great. That's great. That's helpful information with those various alignments. So Brenda, we got many questions written in different ways, but basically about how do you engage these particularly newcomers in discussion in a remote environment, and how do you, because they learn so much from each other in talking to each other, and how do you encourage that in the remote environment?
Yes. So it is very difficult to get students to talk when sometimes I hear like educators, they don't even turn on their cameras. I'm not even sure if they're sitting there, and you know, as a kindergarten, my little one just walks to the bathroom, is not even there half the time. So I get it. But one way is, again, to use images. I know I sound like a broken record, but when we talk about images, you can put images up. It makes students just, their affective filter just lowers, and they feel so much more comfortable. Start with things they already know, things you know for sure they're going to be successful with. I actually went into a virtual classroom for 4th and 5th graders with one of the school districts, and I used frames for fluency with images. I put them up on slides, and I gave them a sentence frame. I then filled in half of the sentence frame, so they only had to fill in the other half. So you kind of guide them through most of the answer, so they feel a lot more confident to just have to give you a piece of it. Then you start to release that, so I do it, we do it, you do it model, right? So now students will do it on their own. Let them write it down first. Let them, you know, practice with you one-on-one. I believe that you can call on students, you know, definitely, because they are comfortable with you later on. But images, start it off for them, make it super simple, then move on to something harder.
Thank you. And this time has gone so quickly. So we have run out of time to take questions. But again, Lori and Brenda and Sari are all available to talk with you one-on-one. Reach out to Brenda and Lori at that contact information on your screen. And we'll also include that in the follow-up email that you'll get either tomorrow or Thursday. Also included in that email will be a link to some of the other recorded on-demand webinars that Brenda has done in particular, where she really shares a lot of these remote learning techniques that she just touched on here with that Frames for Fluency example. We've got several webinars that touch on a lot of different ways to engage students in these remote environments. So keep an eye out for that link. You can also hop over to the Ballard and Ty website right now, and you'll find a link to webinars in the top navigation, and you could go ahead and start watching those on-demand webinars right away. So thank you again all for joining us. Thanks to Ballard and Ty for bringing Laura, Brenda, and Sari with us. Again, in that email that you'll receive in the next day or two, keep an eye out for that. That'll have a link to your certificate of attendance. You'll want to scroll to the very bottom of the email, look for the big orange button that says My Certificate, click on it, and a PDF will download. Sometimes you have to wait a second or two, but that PDF will pop up on your screen and you can download that for your certificate of attendance. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you back on another webinar in the future.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.